Hello, everybody. Welcome to a special edition of the Mindplex podcast. We are here in Singapore at Super AI, and today I'd like to welcome Paul Meinshausen.
Thanks for having me, Lisa.
Yeah.
Good to be here.
So a few things about Paul. Paul is the CEO and co-founder at Aampe, and he specializes in mapping nuanced and complex problems to analytical and statistical methods that can help solve them. His research background is in behavioral, cognitive, and organizational science. He is also an entrepreneur, advisor, and investor, and he co-founded Aampe, which is a B2B SaaS startup that provides personalization layer for notifications and short-form messaging. And that's what we're going to talk about today. Welcome, Paul.
Thank you for having me.
So start off and tell us about Aampe.
Right. So Aampe is a kind of infrastructure, an agentic infrastructure that serves consumer businesses, consumer tech businesses, in the sense that it's a business that will have some kind of digital product experience. So you're not going in and engaging entirely in a physical one-to-one personal space. Those surface areas in terms of a digital product can be anything from a web product in a laptop to a phone, to any of kind of AR, VR devices, anything where you're interacting with a stream of information in order to kind of better your life in some ways. So we're used by a lot of food delivery apps and meditation apps and health and any kind of consumer business like this. And the agentic infrastructure is basically what I like to kind of think of, not our term, but as software 2.0. So software 1.0 is rules. You embed, basically you program deterministic rules that determine the person's interaction, the experience. So they come into the app and then they do this and then this happens. And then they close the app and then 3 days later you send them this message to remind them of your key value proposition.
Okay. I'm starting to get it.
That'd be like a rule, life cycle rule. And so what Aampe does is generate an agent for every single person that comes into that business, every consumer, every user. And then what those agents do is convert and transform the event stream. So the log of every action that person is taking within that digital surface transforms it into a very high dimensional space that allows the agent to represent that user in relation to other people, other users. Then it generates many possible versions of that product experience. So let's say you're taking out a loan from a finance application. That finance application can convey different value propositions to you. It can convey that it's incredibly convenient to apply for the loan, or it can convey that it's very fast to get the loan, or that the rates are really good. So each of those versions of the value proposition can be generated, and then what the agents are doing is just conducting highly parallelized experiments. That generates training data that then the agents learn, that then will allow them to update and adapt and optimize the way they interact with that user. So when they learn that you're really interested in convenience, over time they can transform the login flow or the KYC flow, or when they reach back out to you, they can remind you of how convenient it is to use that product, versus for another person, really that once you're finished with the KYC process, that your loan will come through extremely quickly. So it's basically agents generating a life cycle, generating an experience, rather than rule-based software.
Okay, and this gets into these controlled, parallelized experiments with tagged messages to learn the user preferences, which is something I wanted you to tell us a little bit more about.
Yeah, right. So the really important thing is, and this is something that I think we haven't, it is not as generally recognized yet, is a majority of the AI work that's been done, language models, for example, that a lot of folks are paying attention to generative AI. What it does is it learns over historical data, text, anything, okay? And it says, here's data that's been generated in the world somehow. Now, that's great. But the problem is most businesses, and in fact most people, are not really interested in the past. They're interested in the future and how the future could be different based on their own decisions and actions. So a business wants to grow its business, and it does that by making decisions and doing things. The data that represents that alternative world, what we call a counterfactual, is not in the historical data. It doesn't exist there, because if you haven't tried something, there's no representation of the success or failure of that thing. So what reinforcement allows you to do, and what Amp's agents allow us to do, is generate all the possible versions that are counterfactual to the thing that generated your historical data. So we can sort of say, well, what if I had messaged you on Thursday at 11 a.m. versus the 6 p.m. when I normally send?
Okay.
I can't learn on my historical data because I only ever sent messages at 6 p.m. because that was my rule. Now the agents, because they're running those systematic tests where they say, control for all of these things about users, cluster them into similar groups, and then try different things over those similar groups to learn what is it about the thing that they're trying that causes the difference in behavior.
And how are you getting, just real quick, how are you getting the behavior back in the loop?
Yeah, the behavior is in the log of actions. So
you're giving the users something to choose from and then seeing how they choose.
Yes, although it's not always an explicit choice. A lot of times it's an implicit choice. It's that you are very similar to another person, and I'm showing you something, and you're responding or not, and I'm showing something slightly different to somebody else who's fairly similar to you, and they're either responding or they're not. So it's not like I'm telling you, hey, which do you like? Which do you like? I'm showing you something that I think you like, but I'm showing somebody else something that I think you also might like. And then I'm observing your response. That's the nature of an experiment. And that's what we need AI to be able to do, is run those experiments.
So from the user's point of view, again, I'm just trying to figure out what the user's seeing, because you want to make it flow so you're not like interrupting them or whatever, right? You're just doing something. Right. So how are you, can you give me an example of like something that you would try?
I'll give you an example that, you should be able to sort of, most people can tap into, and it kind of informed my early work. So early in my career, I was working for the Department of Defense building data systems. And so I was fairly young, fresh out of grad school, and I was floating back and forth between Kabul and DC. And in Kabul, I was at headquarters, and I was pretty regularly briefing the commander of the International Security Assistance Force. And one of the things I noticed was that he had this retinue of people behind him that were making all kinds of decisions that compressed his decision space. So in other words, he didn't have to decide about a lot of things because those assistants were making decisions for him.
Because they knew what he would do.
Because they knew what he would do.
Okay.
Fast forward, I went, back, I was at Harvard. My advisor there was really well-known scholar, flown all over the world by corporates and paid a lot of money, tens of thousands of dollars to give talks and to kind of share her expertise. Again, suite of people behind her, kind of allowing her to focus in on what she cares about. My background is in cognitive science. What we know is that cognition is sort of similar to any other physical expression in our bodies. We exert energy, we get tired, and we recover, and then we exert more energy. So you can run, and you can run really fast, and then you will slow down, you'll take a break, and the next day you might go run again. Well, it's very similar for making decisions. And over the course of any person's day, they're making decisions about how to get their kids ready for school, what to eat, when to pay their bills, what to watch on Netflix. And there's more ways they could spend their time than ever before. So we're sort of a surfeit of information, a surfeit of content, so many possible decisions. And all of those decisions are forced on us. So what assistants do is help you not make all those decisions so you can preserve that power for the ones that really matter. Okay, now to answer your question, what is the experience from the user perspective? So if you now imagine yourself as with an assistant, maybe it's the smartest person you could find as an assistant. They're really good at what they do.
You mean a human assistant?
Human. Let's just think about humans, because it's the best form of intelligence we have so far. Okay, what they're going to do is kind of say, hey boss, right? Like, you're flying into New York tomorrow. Here's a couple of options. They're not going to tell you, Yelp or Deliveroo reports that there are 30,000 restaurants in New York City. Do you want this? No, because then you'd be like, oh my God, just tell me 3 restaurants.
Simple decision.
Simple decision, but they'll prompt. Now, maybe they'll say something, and then maybe if that person is short-tempered, hopefully not, they'll be like, what are you talking about? I don't like any of those things. Come on, get it together. Now, what they're going to do is go back, think about that decision, think about the set of restaurants that they recommended, and be like, okay, I cannot make that mistake again. I can't do that thing again.
They're basically going into the corner to try to figure out what they did wrong.
That's right. Exactly. So that's what an agent is doing. And that's what you're experiencing. So even the best human will get it wrong. But what's really important is that they have the capacity to reflect on what they got wrong and then try something different. And hopefully within 2 to 3 or 4 iterations, they will show improvement.
Okay, and this is where the machine learning comes in.
That's right. So the same process has to happen for that agent. They will never get it wrong because even we don't know ourselves. Even our partner, we can get it wrong in terms of we spent 30 years with them, married to them, whatever, and we still get it wrong, right? So there's no way to not get it wrong. But what you can do is have the capacity to learn and improve. That's what we want our software to be able to do, is have the capacity to learn and improve, but on a one-to-one level with a person. And so it has to be able to update and then learn and then update and learn. So that's what you will see as a human, is that as you are interacting with a product over time, it should be sort of saying, here's some options, present them to you in a way that is pleasing to you. You'll choose from those options based on your choices. That system, the next time you open it, it should render slightly differently. It should adjust. It should give you a new set of options, or it should give a different explanation on the top, or a different kind of experience within it. And that becomes the experience that you have as a person.
Right. So it sounds like there's 2 things going on. One is the actual infrastructure that smaller businesses can use to set up their business and get an app up and going. And then you've got this machine learning user preferences stuff going in the background, making the user experience better and better. Did I get that right? Yep. Okay. Yep. All right, great. Well, that sounds...
I would say, unfortunately, we're further away from smaller. In some ways, we're faster to smaller businesses because they have less constraints and less pressures and less organizational overload. But I would say mostly you're seeing this happen with larger tech businesses and enterprises, et cetera.
Okay. So it is for larger corporations more than...
Generally speaking, that's where we see the investments being made. We have lots of businesses that use AMP that are smaller, but it's not like your Shopify's of the world yet. I haven't seen that happen so much.
Sure.
In other words, the merchants that are on something like a Shopify, I think they're...
right. That's sort of all the way to very small.
Yeah, like
a niche business almost.
Business. Yeah, exactly.
Right, exactly. And it sounds to me like, tell me if I'm wrong, but you're providing the sort of infrastructure that really only large corporations would be able to pay for by themselves. And the smaller than huge corporations... but then it sounds like, the special sauce you have running in the background, it could actually be a better system than anything that
I would
certainly
say
a non-specialist would create themselves.
That's right. And just generally speaking, over the next 2, 5, 10 years, we're just seeing a really pretty deep transformation in how we create software. So it won't be really special sauce. It will be it's just the reality is that we're writing software differently than we historically have. And if you think about it in waves, right? The way consumer technology has evolved is, you get to sort of think of 90s as personal computing. We all got our desktop computer. We started to interact with things. And then the web came along. And in the 2000s, you can sort of see people now interacting not just on their device, but on the web. And then mobile came along and transformed the modality. So we're not sitting behind a desk interacting, we're on a phone. But in each of those instances, the way the software itself, the way the application itself was rendered and was experienced was a fixed static template that every user saw the same thing. That maintained itself all the way through into mobile. All we did was take a physical store and shove it behind a screen. Same exact architecture, a big store full of things. Now we have a small app full of things. And you go and you swipe with your finger the same way you would walk through a store. What we're now going to see is you don't go to a big store anymore because 99% of those things in that store are not relevant to you. And I don't mean the physical store. I think there's still some value to that. But in terms of, and there's physical repercussions in terms of you need to only have one piece of land. But in a phone, there's no reason to put all of those things into an application that you open and see because you're not engaging with all of it. And it's just causing cognitive wear and tear for you to have to swipe. Think about like Netflix, all the things you could possibly watch. And it's exhausting to open that up and make a decision, even though you don't really need, because it's just so much stuff. And if it was really keyed down to you, you wouldn't have that cognitive choice problem. And then you could just go straight into watching a show on a Friday night, much more happily and successfully.
That's why, and it does that every so often, right? Netflix actually gets it right every so often. It will recommend a thing that you actually want to see after the other one's ending, right? But it's hit or miss. It's not. It's not consistent.
It's getting a lot better, and actually, you can sort of see some of the things I'm talking about in the Netflix UI. So, for example, traditionally, think about movies, and think about this is a critique I made of machine learning. Traditionally, if you wanted to recommend a movie, if you looked at the data set behind the recommender system, it contained information about the movie. So you just think of a spreadsheet, and you think of the movies on the rows, and then you've got columns. And those columns would be things like the director, the title, the genre.
Yes.
Now think about the genre. The genre would be maybe 1 of 10. It'd be like action, romance, comedy, thriller, horror, right?
Yes.
Now, right, that's what we knew about the movie. So then we're watching what people watch, and we're trying to learn on those characteristics, those features. It's incredibly shallow, because if you told me about a movie, you wouldn't use almost any of those words. There's like 180,000 active words in the English language. If you told me about a show you watched, actually just do that for 2 seconds. Tell me, have you watched something recently?
The 2 times they got it right, it was on actor or director that they pivoted on. Absolutely.
Sure, but if you think about it, like who's that main actor in let's sort of say Breaking Bad, right? Very famous actor,
Bryan
maybe
Cranston.
You like him. Yeah, Bryan Cranston, exactly.
Okay.
Now you watched and you loved Breaking Bad.
This actually happened to me in real life.
Okay.
And so it gave me all of the other Bryan Cranston vehicles for the past 5 years, and I went through them one by one and. Wasn't going to happen.
So maybe he was in. I think he was in Kung Fu Panda, right? And that's not what you cared about. Exactly. What you cared about was that it was dark, it was gritty, So what you really want is something maybe like John Wick or something like Succession or something that has more grit and has like.
It's more difficult. Those are more difficult data points, right?
Right.
On what kind of gritty, because it's sending me all sorts of like dark stuff now that I'm not interested in.
Exactly. So it's going to get it wrong, but what it needs to know is what do you care about on more specific dimensions? Yes. So the key thing I'm just trying to say is that now Netflix has recently their UI contains something like 3,000 tags that they're managing that are much more specific. So now you can kind of see, instead of just choosing from actions and thrillers, you'll sort of see gritty or authentic or cinematic or black comedy or all of these much more rich language. And if the key thing is if you show those labels, if you show those tags, if you describe something in a particular way in a surface, and if you, Lisa, respond to that, I've now learned that you care about that thing. It's just like as your assistant, I would tell you, hey, check out Shogun because it's really authentic and cinematic and it has this geopolitical conflict. Ding.
That would be correct for me. Yes.
So then what I would learn is that you're responding to those terms. Whereas if I had said, sort of some other kind of like silly romantic comedy, and you'd be like, nah, I'm speaking on those terms, and then I can observe your response. And that's what we need the application to surface that rich language, that rich description, so that the agent can observe your response and then learn from you and then adapt.
And then apply it to all the other users that seem to be like you.
That's right.
Because that's
they need to be able to match you on many dimensions. So that's the other part, which is taking that clickstream, that representation of the fact that you're watching on a Saturday morning, but then you're dipping in and you're looking at a lot of shows on a Tuesday afternoon, but you're not actually watching, you're waiting for 2 days later. So you want to take all of that and represent that person that way so that we can then cluster you with someone who's very similar. Not because they're a woman, or because...
well, not just because. That's one of the factors.
Exactly. Right. Yeah. So what I mean is not because of that, as in we don't want to do a segmentation on that one thing. We want to combine it with a much richer description of you as a person who watches things, engages with content, etc. So that is also part of what we need the software to do in a way that it's not, right? Today, what happens is we just capture a lot of data in a database, and then a data scientist will build a model over it. It's just not, it's not generating, it's not constantly adapting. It's just older school software, but we're moving away from it very quickly.
Neat. Well, that's really neat. That's basically the kind of personalization that we've been waiting for forever.
Yeah.
Kind of.
Yeah. I think,
neat.
you know, if you think about it, I think to me, like you can think about it as like, what does it mean for human flourishing? And it's not necessarily more money, although that's helpful. It's really more better high quality time, right? We're all only on Earth for a certain amount of time. And the thing that kills most of that time is poor decisions and constraints that lead to poor decisions. And so removing those need for those decisions or supporting them in a better way is what allows you to kind of enrich life by choosing the thing that you most care about, focus on that. And that's what we want software to be able to do, is let you focus on the things that are most likely to allow you to be creative, express yourself, and live a rich life.
Nice. All right, great. Well, thank you very much for coming on the show. And anything else you want to throw in before we leave?
No, that was it.
All right.
Hope I was enjoying Singapore, and yeah.
Yeah, have a great time in Singapore, and we'll see you later. All right, this is Mindplex checking out. We will see you later. Sweet dreams, everybody.